of the COVID-19 battle, because unlike most folks that have been able to either work from home or who have been able to social distance, Elwyn is essential services. I mean, we have a lot of individuals who are really dependent on our care, and so as an essential service, we still have to go to work every day. We have thousands of people who are out working in group homes or working in other facilities, and that puts them at greater risk. So we have seen more than 100 positive cases just at Elwyn, and so we've really been fighting this battle for the last few months out on the front lines.
Do you mean among the staff at Elwyn?
Well,
or
half of
staff and clients?
Well, yeah, it's both. It's a mix of both. Our clients tend to be older,
right,
and they also tend to have co-occurring medical conditions that put them at greater risk. So,
right,
as they have tested positive, they have had to, in many cases, be transferred to hospitals or to other facilities, and that then in turn puts our staff at risk. So our staff has had to become infection control experts. A lot of us, right, have all had to become infection control experts almost overnight.
Right.
And but for those that are being served, it's like we all hear about nursing homes these days. The reason that I saw a statistic that 2/3 of all the deaths in Pennsylvania were at nursing homes, which was hard to believe. But if you've got 6,000 deaths in Pennsylvania, something like 4,000 of them have been at nursing homes. And so we realize that those who are older and those who are also either medically fragile or who have other conditions are especially at risk. And therefore, those who are doing the work in those facilities are also at risk. So it's a tough place to be.
Right. In that context, how do you deal with the lack of equipment, or were you prepared with masks and ventilators and all that?
Yes, in March, when facilities first started to close and people started to really gain an understanding of this virus, we were really behind the curve. Not only hospitals, but even facilities like Elwyn facilities, and even ordinary folks on the street. We're having a hard time getting protective equipment, and that has improved somewhat as companies have started to, manufacture these things, masks and gowns and gloves and face shields, and it's now at a point where I can speak for Elwyn specifically. We feel like we have the protective equipment that we need, but again, all of that assumes that things are going to continue to improve. And I think that, as I was saying earlier, some states are now seeing their curves getting much worse and their hospitalizations start to go up. And so, the market for this equipment is going to continue to fluctuate, and we'll have to keep an eye on it.
Right. How easy it is for you to obtain masks right now?
Well, today we're able to get them. We're able to order them, and I think that we consider the supplies that we have now sufficient for us. So there's not a problem. But if we had been talking in March, I would tell you that we had a team of people that were doing nothing but calling manufacturers in the United States and even looking for providers or suppliers outside of the country. So there was definitely a shortage a couple of months ago, and people were really rationing that equipment. I think today the situation has improved, but again, we don't know if this is going to flare up. And you can now walk into a CVS and you can see masks for sale. That was not the case 2 months ago. You were hard pressed to find them.
Right. Now you said that you had some staff and clients who were infected. What steps have you taken in terms of a crisis like New York had with ventilators and stuff like that? Do you have enough of those?
Yes. Well, for a provider like us, we can't afford to have ventilators and that sort of equipment. If an individual is is positive for COVID, the steps that we have taken is to create isolation units where those people are separated from everyone else, and we limit the staff that have access to them, and we also make sure that the protocols for health and for safety are increased in those units. And if they continue to get even sicker and need a ventilator or need additional treatment, that's when they're transferred to hospitals. But we've had to adjust the way we obviously never had isolation units before COVID came along. So we've had to take those steps. And I think that's the same kind of thing that nursing homes are different than a provider like Elwyn, but they've had to struggle with that same thing. If normally you have a unit where you have maybe 10 elderly individuals who are living in a nursing home, you might have one staff or two that are circulating among them in a nursing home. As they started to get sick, they were not clearly not as able to pivot to a new protocol where they could isolate people and where they could protect them, and that's why they had unfortunately so many deaths in those facilities. It's one of the reasons. But we have done what we can. We've had a lot of positive cases, like I said, but we've only had a handful of people who have passed away. So we feel like we've done the best we can given the age and the fragility and the risk factors of those in our care.
I did some work with Congreso here in North Philly. I was a member of the board for a few years. And one of the things that, one of the statistics the organization used to provide was the number of clients that they serve in a year, because that also helped them to get funds from the government and all that. So how many clients do you serve?
Well, in a typical year, we serve 20,000 individuals. But Fernando, you have to remember that when Governor Wolf in the state of Pennsylvania, and pretty much all states did the same thing, he issued an emergency declaration back in March, and as part of that declaration, he defined what services were essential. So things like SEPTA and public transportation and grocery stores, those things were considered essential, and they remained open. And everything else that was possible to close was closed. And for a lot of nonprofits that operated day programming, such as an outpatient facility or services like in public schools, those kind of things, they were closed. And so I would imagine that Congreso has most of their services have also been closed because their daily programs and their locations have been closed.
That's right.
And Elwyn closed the things that it could, but for a group home that we're operating, let's say in a community, you have a home that looks like anyone else's home, where there are maybe 4 individuals living there who have severe autism or maybe Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. That's their home. We're not going to close that. There's nowhere else for those individuals to go. That's where they live. Right. So that was considered an essential service, just like a nursing home. You're not going to send the elderly people in a nursing home back to their family members. They live at that home. So those residential facilities remained open. And that's really the place where there has been so much danger, because you have older folks, you have staff that are coming in shifts to care for them 24/7, and that's been the challenge. So we're serving less people today. I would say we're serving just maybe a couple of thousand people, as opposed to what we would a normal year again would be more like 20,000, because a lot of people that we serve are children, let's say, who we serve only for a few hours a day, and those type of programs have been safely closed temporarily. So our exposure and our risk is based on the residential programs that we operate.
Señores oyentes de USA la Media, están escuchando La Mesa Redonda, una entrevista con Rex Carney, Chief of Staff at the nonprofit Elwyn, dedicated to health care for the mentally challenge and for other activities that Rex is describing now. We're going to take a brief pause here, and on the other side of this pause, we'll continue with more questions for Rex. Les habla Fernando Mendez, Dylan de Rosato al tablero, Iris, Violeta on the phone, as well as Rex Carney. Regresamos en un momento.
Being prepared is a part of who you are, but it's especially important in the case of a disaster. Be informed about possible emergencies in your area. Make a plan that covers where you go in an emergency. Build a kit with the things you need to survive. There's no one more capable of planning for your situation than you. Start your plan today. Go to ready.gov/myplan.
What do you think you're doing, Kevin?
Was just gonna drive home.
There are several warning signs present that you shouldn't be driving.
Like hearing voices?
Like your text-to-emoji ratio?
Oh man, the selfies. Selfie, nailed it.
We all have warning signs that let us know that we're probably not okay to drive. Mine is pretending to be your subconscious.
Craig, come on man, let's split a ride home.
Adentro llueve y parece que nunca va a parar.
The Round Table desde el corazón de la ciudad del amor fraternal. Les habla Fernando Mendez, Dylan de Rosato al tablero, Iris Violeta por teléfono, and a special guest, Rex Carney, from an organization that I must confess, Rex, I was not acquainted with Elwyn, even though we sort of I was involved with Congreso and with Youth Build, which also served the community as non-profits. But I'm very pleased to find out that your organization's done so much for special education and supporting day programs for children with intellectual disabilities. So that's among other things that you do. So that's what I was going to ask you. Congreso used to describe the services they offer as like different points of contact with a client who came in for one particular need, but then you find out that they also need, assistance with living arrangements, with education, with children at home. So is that the case also with Elwyn?
Yes, absolutely. And especially if you think about autism, for example, everyone has heard about autism, but autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects an individual for their life. There is no solution that makes autism go away. So what we have learned over the years is that the earlier that you can identify autism in a child, the more effective you can be at treating it and providing supports. But as Elwyn is now identifying children in the city as young as 3 years old, and there's even programs that are able to do the testing and to provide information about a child's autism diagnosis earlier than that. And what that means is that you can provide therapies and you can provide services that help those children adapt their skills, hopefully to be able to go into the public school system and to be more successful, because the earlier that you're able to provide those services, the more you can help. But as you said, along the way, what we've learned is that there's a very high frequency of other behavioral health conditions that are present for a lot of these children that are sometimes masked or hidden by their autism diagnosis. In the past, you might have a child who, let's say, has autism, but also has anxiety or depression, and they weren't always diagnosed for both of those conditions. Today, we are much better at being able to say this is because when a child is 3 years old, a parent might look at their child and say, my child doesn't seem to be like the other children. And in the past, they might get a diagnosis that is on one side or the other, either autism or maybe, a behavioral health diagnosis. Today, we're much better at being able to look at these children and say, well, they have autism, but they also have a co-occurring behavioral health condition. And that allows us to do a better job of putting together a plan to serve that child. And then as that child grows through life, as you said, other things can come up. And, it's funny. We all have heard about Down syndrome, right? Everyone knows, I think, about Down syndrome. As we've gotten better at serving people with Down syndrome, we found, and they're living longer. People who have Down syndrome used to live only into their 30s. Today, people with Down syndrome are living into their 50s and 60s. And as they've gotten older, the science and the research has shown that people with Down syndrome are much more likely to develop dementia. Now, no one knows why, but that was never known before. And part of the reason was people weren't living as long. So now, at least we're able to say that, as you pointed out, for people who are living with challenges, they often have more than one challenge. But in the past, these individuals would just be kind of given one diagnosis or be lumped together. Now we're able to kind of pull some of those conditions apart and treat them individually. So I think we're getting better at it.
Yeah, and also I guess the science also has advanced, so you have more tools available, more knowledge available as to how to deal with these illnesses.
No, there's no question.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, there was one special education class at my school, and the way that my school worked, and again, this was in the 1970s, any child who was not considered a typical child was just put in the special education class, and it didn't matter if that child, what we know now is some of those children had autism, some of them had a behavioral health condition, some may have had Down syndrome, and each of those children back in the 1970s probably could have benefited from much more targeted services, but they were all just put into the same classroom. Today, services have evolved and kind of differentiated so that, and like you say, the science has increased and the testing has been refined so that if you have a child today who is behaving in a way that's different than what you would consider typical children to be, you can go to specialists who will provide testing and who will help to identify what the particular needs are, and then those needs can be targeted. And therapies have been evolved to help address those things so that you can get those kinds of conditions or diagnoses addressed more efficiently.
One of the things that has not changed for your nonprofit and for all nonprofits is the funding needs. Always money is always short in most nonprofits. So how are you doing with your funding?
Well, again, before COVID-19, I would say that that funding for for Elwyn was about the same as most nonprofits. You provide a service, and then you hope to be repaid for those services by either government or by other philanthropic entities. And I think we did an okay job. Like you said, funding is always tight, and it changes based on who has been elected. So it can go up and down, but you adapt your services so that you can hopefully cover your costs. Nonprofits generally don't make money, but they aim to not lose money. And so that has kind of been the case. But since COVID-19 has come along, it's really changed, I think, the game for a lot of nonprofits, because like Elwyn, this year we have $3 million in unplanned expenses that were specifically related to the personal protective equipment, the PPE that you referenced earlier. Those costs were not put in the budget when the year started, and yet we've had to absorb those costs, because it wasn't like we could say that we just won't get any masks or gowns or gloves. We had to buy them. So those are additional costs, and we're now going back to government and saying, these are things that we did not plan for, but you told us that we are an essential service. So we're out in the community working with people who are high risk, and we have made these expenditures, and we now need to be reimbursed. And so we are asking government to provide relief funding. And some of those funds were provided. We've all heard about Congress passing a lot of legislation to pump money into the system, and some of it was earmarked for providers like Elwyn, and we're starting to see some of that money. But nonprofits like Elwyn have had to get in line with a lot of other providers who are suffering from this crisis.
Sure. At this point, everybody is in need of more money, because, as you say, the equipment is expensive. That personal protection equipment is all these masks that people use, you think that you need only a few, but daily you probably use thousands of those masks alone. That alone will be a huge expense.
Yeah, I think our burn rate for masks is something like 10,000 masks a week.
Yeah. Across
our system.
Wow. Yeah, that alone will put a strain on any budget for nonprofits. Well, I know that your experience goes beyond this nonprofit, and you spent some time in Washington. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about that after this brief pause here at Usa la Media. Les habla Fernando Mendez. Our special guest today, Rex Carney from Elwyn, and it is Violeta on the phone. Les habla Fernando Mendez, Dylan de Rosato al tablero. Regresamos en un momento.
Sometimes the things we do or say can make others feel hurt, excluded, or isolated. Everything you say and do creates an impact.
How am I supposed to save the whole world?
You can't think about saving the world. You have to think about saving one person.
Because of you, someone's entire life can change. You don't have to be a superhero to have a positive impact.
Friends?
Friends.
They call me Maxie, but I prefer tripod. I was your above-average four-legged homie, and then wham, bam, minivan. Some people pity me. Now that's lame. I still run, fetch, and swim. And the ladies love me. I'm the ultimate wingman. Just don't ask me to high-five.
Señoras oyentes de USA la Media, estamos aquí de nuevo con su programa La Mesa Redonda de Round Table desde el corazón del barrio hispano en la ciudad del amor fraternal. Les habla Fernando Mendez, Dylan de Rosato al tablero. Special guest today, Rex Carney and Iris Violeta on the phone from Virginia. Rex Carney, so Chief of Staff at Elwyn, and I think I'm going to ask you a few questions about your Washington experience. But Iris had a question before we move on to the other topic.
Is it possible for you to explain a little bit, just very quickly, what is it in this belief that vaccinating the children will cause autism? And the next question will be, if a parent wants to call you straightforward without the intervention of another agency, how could they get a hold of you or your agency?
Sure. Well, the question of vaccinations is, a very big question in the United States, and there has been recently a movement by some to question whether or not vaccines are safe, and that's a broader question. That I think is going to unfortunately continue, and I think we'll see that continue when there ultimately is a vaccine for COVID, because there are people out there who are distrustful of whether or not vaccines actually provide safety or whether or not they may be contributing to things. But on the specific question of autism, I can tell you this. There was a study that was done many years ago that suggested that vaccines can somehow contribute to autism. Now, that particular study has since been widely and I think comprehensively disproven. And the people who were behind it and the results of the survey have been very carefully looked at and determined that there's really no basis for that argument. So for anyone who is listening, I would say there is absolutely no reason to believe that vaccines cause autism. However, we do not know what causes autism today. There's lots of research being done. There's genetic research that is being done, and we are trying to determine that. We know a few things, that if the age of the parent, older parents, can slightly increase the possibility of an autism diagnosis in a child. We're learning, slowly some other things, but we do not know. But it is not vaccines. However, that rumor persists in many conversations, and we hear it all the time. And all I can say is there is no scientific research that links them. I will say again that I think some of this, and this goes to the broader question of vaccines in general, that people, if they don't have the answer, if you have a child with autism and you're struggling to find out how they got it, you start thinking about what could have caused this. And the fact that autism starts to show up in a child around the age, as early as the age of 1 or 2, a lot of parents have said, well, right after I had my child vaccinated, they started to show these signs. Now, that is a causal connection, or I should say it's a related connection that it happened at the same time. But it doesn't mean that the vaccine caused autism. But in a parent's mind, it can be a suspicious factor. But again, just to be clear, the science does not support any connection between the two. Now, again, the broader question of vaccines is something that throughout America, we've seen parents in the last year or two start to come out and say they don't want to immunize their children against measles. And as a result of that, we've had outbreaks of measles and other, childhood diseases that had mostly gone away. So the overwhelming science is that vaccines are safe and that vaccines prevent against diseases and that they do not cause diseases or disorders. But that has not stopped a lot of people from questioning them. And I think some questioning of our food and our drug policies in this country is fine. We should all, ask questions. But I think we have to be really careful to look at the side. On your second question, any parent, whether it is Hispanic families or from any other background, is welcome to contact Elwyn, and particularly for the program we're talking about with young children. All you have to do is go to the Elwyn website, which is elwyn.org, elwyn.org, and there's a phone number that you will get a live person, 215-222-8054. But it's on our website, and any parent can call and get information. And even if you don't, if you're just concerned that your child has behaviors that you think are not, what you would see in typically developing children, and you want to talk to someone, we have folks that can either talk about our services or who can direct you to the appropriate services in the city. So we're happy to talk to parents. This is what we do. And I would actually say to your question, I think that we would like to have more interaction with, whether it's the Puerto Rican community or any other community in the city, because a lot of parents are uncertain, and it's sometimes difficult to get answers, and they don't know where to turn. And there's also, with a lot of these diagnoses we're talking about, there's a stigma attached to it. A parent does not want to, first of all, a parent doesn't want to admit or even accept the fact that their child may be behaving differently, and they don't want to talk about it to their friends and their families, and so there's a hesitation for a lot of families. But you can always call Elwyn, and we're happy to talk about what we do, and if we don't have the services, then we can certainly point parents in the right direction.
Excellent. Thank you. That information, that telephone number that you gave us, will you repeat it, please, Rex?
Sure. In Philadelphia, the number is 215-222-8054.
8054. Okay.
Yeah, and again, that number is on the Elwyn website, and you can navigate to a page about early intervention is the name of the program. But if you just put early childhood, you'll find the resources you need there.
Excellent. Se trata de esta entidad Elwyn, ELWYN, y encuentra usted información en elwyn.com. ¿Es .com o .org?
.org.
Es elwyn.org, O-R-G. Y el número de teléfono es 215-222-8054. Y usted puede encontrar más información allí en cuanto a intervención para los niños, para los jóvenes con problemas intelectuales o de comportamiento. Así que es una compañía, es una entidad que sirve a la comunidad en Filadelfia. Este número es para Filadelfia solamente, es una entidad nacional, así que ellos sirven en otras partes del país. Estamos en una conversación con Rex Carney. He's the chief of staff at Elwyn. So, Rex, you have quite an interesting and varied background. You were in Washington, and you were chief of staff for a senator, Patty Murray. So can you tell us about your Washington experience?
Yes, well, I went to Washington, D.C. when I was 21 years old, and I originally went there to do an internship, but at the end of the internship, I was offered a job on Capitol Hill, and I had been studying political science, and so I thought I'll do this for a year and see what it's like. And 1 year turned into 2, and ultimately I wound up spending 10 years working in Congress. So I was there throughout the 90s, from 1990 to 2000. And it was a fantastic experience. I would recommend to any young person who wants to get a real idea of how this country works and how policies and issues are debated. It was really a fantastic experience. I will say, as I think back on that time, it informed me and kind of created my career path. But I will say, as I look back on it, that Washington, D.C. in the 1990s was very different than it is today. In the 1990s, we were still able to get things done in Congress. And the parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, even though they had different views, would find a way to meet in some kind of a middle ground and to still compromise on legislation and on issues. And no one ever got everything they wanted, but everyone got some of what they wanted. And that was the way that business was done. And today in America, we have really turned into a society that's much more polarized, and you see it on the streets, but you also see it in Congress and in Washington. And I think it's an unfortunate thing, because I saw a system that really worked, but most people that I talk to today, I still have a lot of friends in Washington, D.C., they say that Washington doesn't really work like that anymore. You have two sides of a battle, and there really is no compromise or no common ground that can be found. And you see it on everything from the impeachment process, where the House impeached the president and the Senate wasn't even willing to, the House is Democrat controlled. You see it in the Senate, Republicans weren't even willing to take it up. And you see it today, even today, where the House is talking about, funding for COVID, and the Senate is saying, we don't think we need it. And the House is saying, we want police reform. And the Senate is saying, we want a very different version of police reform that doesn't do any of those things. And so whether or not they are able to find common ground on those things, is an open question. But I think that's the change that we've seen in Washington over the last 25 years, and I think ultimately it's been bad for the country.
You think young people don't feel inspired to do what you did and join the ranks of the public servants in Washington?
Well, I haven't seen data on that. I think that young people, I'm very hopeful for this country, and the reason that I'm hopeful is I look at young people, and I think that young people tend to be more idealistic. And when I went to Washington, I was in one party, and I had friends that were in the other party, and we disagreed, but we both went to Washington because we wanted to make a difference. And I think that's fine. I think young people should go to Washington or get involved in issues, regardless of their view, and get out and debate them. I think what we're seeing on the streets today in America is a good thing. And I'm heartened when I see young people. You look at these protests on the streets, and by large, we're talking about a younger generation. Some of us older folks, we might not have the energy to get out there in the streets. But you see a lot of young people, and I think that young people who are passionate about the issues is a good thing. I think that I would guess that just as many young people are still going to Washington. The problem is when they get to Washington now, they're basically told, you're either in this camp or that camp, and whichever one you're in, that's all you're able to think and to do. And people have lost the art of compromise. And I think that's what we need to find. We need to find that, frankly, on the streets today. We need to find that for Black Lives Matter, and we need to find it for police reform. We need to find the common ground where we can say there are things that we can do. They might not be all the way to one side or to the other, but there are some things that we can do. And unfortunately, we have not had leadership in Washington that has been able to articulate what that common ground should look like.
Yeah, when you were in Washington, who was in charge of the Senate and Congress? Who were the leaders?
Well, they changed over the years, but you know, the majority leader in the Senate was Bob Dole, who was a Republican from Kansas, and back then we thought Bob Dole was very, very conservative. Today,
By today's
Bob Dole
standards.
would be considered a moderate.
Yes.
People talk about Ronald Reagan being a really conservative guy when he was president in the 80s. What people don't realize is, Ronald Reagan supported, environmental protections, and he supported social policies, and he even agreed to raise taxes. Those are things that any Republican today would be opposed to. So the definition of a Republican back then was much different. Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House for some of those years. I mean, those people back then were considered to be conservatives. I look back on that and say, those guys today wouldn't even stand a chance in their party.
Party labels don't make sense now.
I'm sorry?
The party labels do not make sense nowadays. So
no, they really don't. And again, there were. If you think about, some people here may remember Arlen Specter, who is the senator from Pennsylvania.
Sure.
He was considered quite a conservative in the Senate in the 80s and the 90s. Mm-hmm. He would have been considered more toward the conservative end of the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. We all know today, when you look at Arlen Specter, that Arlen Specter was a fairly balanced. I think he grew up in Philly. I think he went to Alney High School. He would today be considered a moderate. He was one of the people who helped to bring sides together and to find compromise. And you can't find people like Arlen Specter anymore in the Senate. They just do not exist. How could it be that the Republican president makes a statement that is untrue or unfair, and not a single member of his party
right.
will stand up and question him? I guarantee you, if Arlen Specter was still in the Senate, he would be opposing every single thing that Donald Trump says. I don't think Arlen Specter had a single thing in common with Donald Trump. And so we've come to a place where that ability to bring people together to solve problems is in short supply.
Yes. I mean, I had a personal anecdote with Arlen Specter at one point. He was at the gym where I went on Broad Street, and I saw him sitting there, and he was fiddling with something. I couldn't see what it was. So I approached him, and I explained who I was. I was hoping to hook him and bring him to one of my radio shows. So I spoke to him for a little while, and I said, I admire your work and what you have done, blah, blah, blah. So, and then all of a sudden, he turns around and pushed in his listening devices and says, "So what did you say?" That's like, so I wasted my time. But anyway, but I agree with you that he was by all means a moderate, and he was an effective senator, and the Senate at different points, the legislature at different points has been ineffective, but never like this. Right now, we're really entrenched on the Republican and Democratic side, and nothing really changes, and especially with Mitch McConnell. nothing moves through there. He says that anything that comes through his desk is dead. So that has to change. I hope this guy goes. I mean, he has competition with a strong one for the first time in a long time, and I wish he could be defeated. That would help a lot. Even if Trump won, if they lose the Senate, that would change the whole thing too. So, but let's hope.
It's really it's unfortunate because after the Republican Party lost the presidential campaign to Barack Obama in 2012, they held a big conference where they got together and they said, why are we getting beaten so badly in this country? And they came to the conclusion that they had gone too far to the right and that they had lost particularly minority communities. They've lost African Americans, they've lost Latinos, and their numbers in that presidential campaign of 2012 were really terrible. And they said, we need to do a better job with minority communities, and we need to change the way we're approaching things. And that was in 2012, the Republican Party had an opportunity to do the right thing. They laid it all out. They said, here's our plan. And just a couple years after that, Donald Trump came along and said, I want to be the leader. And, that plan was never implemented. And in fact, the party was taken in the other direction and has, in my opinion, gotten so much worse. Whether it's the African American community, which I think today is probably more opposed to the Republican Party than they have been in a long time, and certainly the Latino community. If you look at you look at the policies that this president has had with regard to immigration and all the divisive things that he has said and done, the party has lost ground with minority communities. And you talk about Mitch McConnell, who's running the Senate. I think he sees his job. His party is shrinking, and it is at risk of continually being in the minority. And he is just trying to stop the bleeding right now. The reason he won't let anything go through the Senate is because they have a very limited scope. They're limited by what the president says. They're not willing to cross the president, and therefore they can't even. If Mitch McConnell tried to compromise with Nancy Pelosi, he would be attacked by the president.
Yeah, Trump wouldn't let him. Yeah.
So he's in a position where, I mean, I'm not defending him because I think he's out of step with America and the people. And I agree with you that he might be in trouble in Kentucky this time around because he's facing a serious challenge. But he's part of a dying party, and he doesn't have anything he can do about it because he's in a box.
Yes. There was this morning there was a summary of the one of the reasons that Trump is facing huge challenges. This Bolton's book. We would need another hour to discuss the contents of that book. It's already been discussed in the New York Times. But Trump can change the conversation. He has survived so many controversies: the Russia probe, the Ukraine phone call impeachment, Charlottesville when he defended the Nazis, Helsinki when he sided with Putin, children at the border that he put in cages, the most recent stuff at Lafayette Square where he cleared the peaceful demonstration to go pose in front of a church with a Bible that he probably has never read. The Reverend Sharpton said, "Why don't you open it and read from Ecclesiastes?" Dios mío. Yeah. Well, anyway, this has been a tremendous program. Thank you, Rex. Plenty of information that you gave us. And to become acquainted with Elwyn, with your entity that is helping to improve our community. So I want to thank you.
And I would just say, Fernando, that the only reason that Donald Trump was able to win the presidency, remember that Hillary Clinton had more votes in this country than Donald Trump did.
I know, the
by
Electoral
millions.
College, yeah.
The Electoral College, and there were basically 2 or 3 states that were really the key states in the whole country, and Pennsylvania was one of them.
Right.
Pennsylvania went for Donald Trump, and if we want to make sure, like you said, he's very effective at getting out of jams, and he wants to get reelected very badly, but he must have Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan to win again. And the answer for anyone who disagrees with the president today is to make sure they get out and vote, register to vote and encourage friends to vote. And I think that is the way that we can all make our voices heard. And this may be one of the more important votes for the country in a long time, maybe ever. And that's something we all can do. So,
well, Rex, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope this is only the first of many participations in this program. Thank you. You have one last statement? You have like 30 seconds.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I think that this is a time in America where there's so much uncertainty. We have, we don't just have one crisis. We have 3 crises happening on top of each other. One is the COVID-19 health crisis. One is our economic crisis. People are out of work and they're uncertain about their job and their future. And now we have the Black Lives Matter and the protesting on the streets. So we have 3 overlapping crises. And there's never been a more important time for people to get engaged, register to vote, do the census, fill out the census, and get involved in the conversation. I think this is a key moment for our country and for all of us who care about making America a better place.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rex. Señores oyentes de USA la Media, hemos hablado aquí en USA la Media, la mesa redonda, con Rex Carney de la organización Elwyn. Y estuvo también con nosotros Iris Violeta, que nos llamó desde Virginia. Muchas gracias por su sintonía en el día de hoy. Se despide de ustedes Fernando Mendez, Dylan de Rosato al tablero. Hasta la próxima.